The sun had barely started to set when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching against my private gravel driveway. My stomach clenched. Nobody came out here unless they were lost, stupid, or looking for trouble. I grabbed my coffee, leaned against my porch railing, and watched as a gleaming white SUV rolled up like it owned the place. The doors swung open, and out stepped the walking nightmare of suburban horror. A middle-aged woman with a scowl sharp enough to cut glass, an air of self-importance so thick you could bottle it, and a name tag that read Karen, HOA president. I took a deep breath. I had moved out to this land for peace, to escape the hell of HOA nonsense, and yet somehow it had followed me. Karen marched up my porch steps, giving a dramatic sigh as if merely breathing my off-grid air was an inconvenience. "We need to talk," she said, placing her manicured hands on her hips like she was about to tell a teenager to turn down their music. I sipped my coffee. "I doubt that." "Oh, I think we do," she countered, glancing over my property like a queen inspecting land she had just conquered. "Your property technically falls under the jurisdiction of the Maplewood HOA, and we've been very patient waiting for you to register." I almost spit out my drink. "No, it doesn't." She gave a condescending laugh, the kind that made me want to introduce her to the business end of a shovel. "Well, according to our records." "Your records are wrong." Karen's eye twitched. "It's just a simple matter of compliance. There are rules, and everyone has to follow them." I looked at my land, 50 acres of pristine, untouched forest, a self-sufficient homestead, and most importantly, a 10-foot electric fence that kept my closest neighbors, my wolves, safe and sound. Rules? There were no rules out here except the ones I made. She followed my gaze and frowned. "Yes, about that. You can't have a fence that high. Also, the dogs will have to go. Dangerous animals aren't allowed under HOA regulations." I took a slow step forward, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "They're not dogs," I said calmly. "They're wolves." Karen scoffed, as if I had told her I had pet dragons. "Don't be ridiculous. Wolves are illegal." I smiled. "Not out here." She turned red, clearly not used to being challenged. "This is unacceptable. If you don't comply, we will take legal action." I leaned closer, lowering my voice just enough to make her flinch. "Karen, you and your HOA don't have a single legal right to this land. So I suggest you take your little clipboard, get back in your SUV, and drive back to whatever nightmare cul-de-sac you crawled out of." For a moment, I thought she'd explode. Instead, she plastered on a sickly sweet smile. "Well, if you won't follow the rules willingly, then I guess I'll have to handle this differently." That should have been my first warning. But I underestimated her insanity. A week later, I woke up to chaos. I stepped outside and was met with a scene straight out of a disaster movie. Tents. Everywhere. People stomping through my fields, setting up portable grills, laughing, shouting. Children ran wild, knocking over my solar panels. A group of adults set up a beer pong table right next to my rainwater collection barrels. And at the center of it all, Karen, sitting in a camping chair like some kind of festival queen, sipping wine and giving orders. I rubbed my temples, trying to process what I was seeing. "What the hell?" Karen beamed at me like I was a long-lost friend. "Good morning. I figured if you don't want to be part of the HOA, we'd just bring the community to you." My brain short-circuited. "You brought 100 people to my land?" She gestured around as if she had just built a utopia. "Yes. We're turning this space into a community campground. Isn't it wonderful?" I took a slow breath, fighting the urge to scream. "You're trespassing." "Oh, no," she giggled, waving a stack of papers. "Squatters' rights. If we stay here long enough, we can claim it as community land." I clenched my fists. "That's not how that works." "Oh, but it is," she chirped. "You see, my cousin is a lawyer, and he says—" I cut her off. "Is your cousin actually a lawyer, or is he just some guy who Googled property law?" Karen's lips pursed. "That's irrelevant." A scream cut through the air. One of the campers had wandered too close to the tree line, where my wolves were watching. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the clearing, and the campers nearest to the trees took a hurried step back. Karen's eyes widened. "You need to get rid of those things." I crossed my arms. "They live here. You don't." For the first time, Karen looked uncertain. But then she straightened, flicking her hair over her shoulder. "We'll see about that." I stared at her, realization dawning. She wasn't going to leave. Oh, she had no idea what she'd just started. The chaos continued to unfold before my eyes as the so-called community campground, took root like an infestation. Campers staked their tents without a care in the world, trampling over my land as if it were a public park. The laughter, the shouting, the complete disregard for boundaries, it was all so absurd that for a moment, I thought I might be hallucinating. But no, this was real, and standing in the middle of it all, reveling in the disaster, was Karen, sipping from her ever-present wine glass like a queen overseeing her kingdom. I took a slow breath, my patience hanging by a thread. One man had already dragged a massive speaker from his truck, blasting generic pop music across the property. Another group was unloading a full-blown barbecue station near my tool shed. Kids ran wild, their sticky hands smearing dirt and whatever else they had been eating all over my solar panels. Someone had even started stringing fairy lights between my trees, as if they were about to throw a wedding reception in my backyard. "Karen," I said, forcing every ounce of restraint into my voice, "you and all of these people need to leave. Now." She turned to me with that infuriating, self-satisfied smile. "Oh, come on, don't be such a grump. This is good for the community. Fresh air, nature, bonding time. You should be honored. Not everyone gets to host an event like this." I gritted my teeth. "I didn't host anything. You're trespassing." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, pfft. It's not trespassing. It's community-driven property utilization." "That's not a thing," I said flatly. "Well, it should be," she said, crossing her arms. "Look, the point is we're here now and we're staying. There's no law against people camping in nature." I ran a hand over my face. "This is private property." She smirked. "For now." My jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" "Oh, just a little legal loophole my cousin Bob found," she said, far too casually. "You see, if we remain here for long enough, we can claim squatters' rights. And if we turn this into a recognized community space, then it will fall under HOA jurisdiction. And if it's under HOA jurisdiction, well, you'll just have to comply with the rules." My eye twitched. "That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard." She gasped dramatically. "You're just mad that I'm smarter than you." Before I could respond, a shrill scream rang out from the far end of the camp. I turned to see a man standing frozen near the tree-line, his eyes locked on something just beyond the brush. A low, rumbling growl filled the air, deep and primal. My wolves. They had been watching. One of them, a massive black male named Odin, stepped into view, his piercing yellow eyes locked onto the intruder. The man stumbled backward, nearly falling over his own feet. "Dude, there's a freaking wolf over here." Several campers gasped and turned to look, panic spreading through the group. Karen, however, barely flinched. "Oh, stop being dramatic. It's just a big dog." "It's not a dog," I said. "It's a wolf. And he doesn't like uninvited guests." The man bolted back toward the main camp, muttering curses under his breath. A few of the smarter campers followed suit, putting as much distance between themselves and the tree-line as possible. "But Karen?" She just rolled her eyes. "This is exactly why you shouldn't have wild animals," she said. "They're dangerous. What if they attack someone?" "They won't attack unless provoked," I said. "But they also won't tolerate strangers stomping around their territory." Karen scoffed. "You act like they own the land." "They do," I said. "More than you ever will." The next few hours were a blur of frustration. The campers refused to leave, acting as if my land was their personal vacation spot. I called the police, but Karen must have anticipated that because when they arrived, she had already concocted some nonsense about this being a misunderstanding. The officers, clearly exasperated, told her she was in the wrong but also said that getting a legal eviction order would take time. Time I didn't have. As the sun set, the real nightmare began. The party atmosphere kicked into high gear. A bonfire was lit, without my permission of course, right next to my work shed. Drunken laughter filled the night air. A group had somehow managed to bring fireworks and were already setting them off, the echoes sending my wolves into a frenzy. Music blasted so loudly that I could feel the bass in my chest. I stood at the edge of the madness, fists clenched, watching my land be overrun by these morons. Karen, naturally, was loving every second of it, chatting away like the hostess of the most exclusive event of the season. And then, at the worst possible moment, the power flickered. Then it died completely. The floodlights that lined my property shut off, plunging everything into near darkness. The campers froze for a moment, then murmurs of confusion spread through the crowd. The music cut out. The bonfire cast eerie shadows across the field. And then, from the darkness, the first howl rang out. It was long and low, echoing through the trees, sending a ripple of unease through the crowd. A second howl followed. Then a third. Karen's face paled. What was that? I smirked. Oh, you're about to find out. A guttural growl rumbled through the night, closer this time. The campers, now properly spooked, huddled together. The sound of rustling leaves and snapping twigs filled the air as shadowy figures moved just beyond the firelight. One of the campers, a guy in a neon tank top, let out a nervous laugh. A dude? Are those like coyotes or something? Nope, I said. Coyotes wouldn't be this quiet. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. Then another. And another. Panic finally set in. People began scrambling for their tents, tripping over each other in the process. Someone dropped their beer, another screamed. One woman was clutching her boyfriend's arm so tightly that he winced. Karen, for the first time, looked uncertain. You need to do something about them. I crossed my arms. I did. I trained them to protect my property. This is insane, she shrieked. They're going to kill us. I sighed dramatically. Well, if only someone hadn't set up an illegal campground in their territory. More growls. More movement. The wolves were closing in, keeping their distance for now, but making it clear that this was no longer just a backyard gathering. This was a standoff. And my wolves? They weren't the ones who were going to back down. The screams started as soon as the first wolf stepped into the firelight. A massive gray beast with thick fur and piercing golden eyes, he moved like a shadow, his body tense and ready. Another wolf followed, smaller but just as imposing, her ears flicking at the panicked cries of the campers. The rest of the pack remained in the darkness, but their presence was undeniable. They circled, unseen but felt, their growls vibrating in the air like a low drum roll. Karen clutched her wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. This is illegal. You can't just sick wild animals on people. Her voice was shrill, wobbling with barely contained panic. I shrugged, watching as the wolves moved, herding the campers back toward their tents with nothing but controlled dominance. I'm not sicking them on anyone, I said calmly. They live here. You're the ones trespassing. A man in a Hawaiian shirt stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. Dude, are they going to attack? His eyes darted wildly between me and the nearest wolf, who had now lowered his body in an almost playful crouch, though there was nothing playful about the way he bared his teeth. That depends, I said, tilting my head. Are you planning on leaving? The answer should have been obvious, but Karen wasn't ready to admit defeat. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and then, to my complete disbelief, pulled out her phone. I'm calling animal control, she announced, her thumb furiously tapping at the screen. I almost laughed. Good luck with that, I said. They don't remove legally owned animals from private property. These are dangerous predators, she screeched. What kind of psycho keeps wolves as pets? They're not pets, I corrected. They're family. The Hawaiian shirt guy made a strangled noise in his throat and grabbed his cooler, as if he was finally realizing this was not a vacation spot. A few other campers were already creeping toward their cars, whispering anxiously to each other. The tension in the air was thick, the reality of the situation settling into their beer-soaked brains. They had come onto my land thinking they could party without consequences, but now they were realizing they had wandered into a place where they were not in control. Then, of course, Karen had to make things worse. This is harassment, she shrieked, waving her phone in the air. I'll have the police out here so fast, you won't know what hit you. A slow, deep growl rumbled from the shadows, and Karen, despite all her bravado, flinched. I knew that sound. It was Odin, the pack leader, and he did not appreciate threats. His golden eyes gleamed from the darkness, his hulking figure barely visible beyond the flickering firelight. He stepped forward just enough to be seen, his ears flat against his skull, his posture screaming warning. Karen's confidence cracked. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting from me to the wolves. This is just intimidation, she stammered, but she was already backing up. It's reality, I said simply. The fire popped, sending a shower of embers into the air, and one of the smaller campers shrieked. That was all it took. A full-on stampede erupted as campers scrambled for their cars, their tents, and anything else they could grab. People tripped over each other, knocked over lawn chairs, spilled drinks. The Hawaiian shirt guy abandoned his entire campsite, bolting toward his truck like his life depended on it. Within minutes, half the crowd was in their vehicles, engines revving as they peeled out onto the dirt road, kicking up dust as they fled. Karen, however, was not so quick to admit defeat. She stood her ground, chest heaving, her face a furious shade of red. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I will not be bullied off this land. I have rights." Odin took a single step forward, and that was all it took. Karen let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a squeak before turning on her heel and marching toward her SUV, her bravado crumbling with every step. She climbed in, slammed the door, and sped off without another word. As the dust settled, I exhaled, the adrenaline slowly draining from my body. The wolves relaxed, their tense posture loosening as the last car disappeared down the road. Odin came to stand beside me, pressing his head against my side in silent reassurance. "Well," I muttered, looking around at the mess they had left behind. "That was fun." The wolves dispersed back into the trees, their job done, and I walked through what remained of the so-called campground. Trash was scattered everywhere, empty beer bottles, discarded food wrappers, and broken camping gear littering my once pristine land. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She would be back, and she would come up with some ridiculous scheme to retaliate. I needed to be ready. The next morning, I started reinforcing my fences, reinforcing my security systems, and making a few calls of my own. Karen had underestimated me, and that had been her first mistake. Her second mistake was thinking she could win. I had a feeling she was about to make a third. The morning after the chaos, I woke up to the eerie silence of a battlefield after the war. The air was still, except for the occasional rustle of the trees and the soft crunch of leaves as my wolves prowled the edges of the property. The so-called campers were gone, leaving nothing behind but a trail of destruction. Beer cans littered the ground, plastic wrappers tangled in the bushes, and there was even a half-burned lawn chair in the middle of what had once been my vegetable garden. I let out a slow breath, surveying the wreckage. I knew Karen wouldn't let this go. She wasn't the kind of person to accept reality, and losing control of the situation only made people like her double down. Sure enough, as I scrolled through my phone, I saw a notification from a local community page. Karen had gone full propaganda mode. The post was written in her usual condescending tone, dripping with false concern and self-righteousness. Urgent warning to our beloved community. A local property is harboring dangerous wild animals and threatening public safety. These aggressive creatures are not pets and pose an extreme risk to our children and families. As responsible citizens, we must take action before a tragedy occurs. I had to hand it to her. She really knew how to play the victim. The comment section was already a dumpster fire of people who had no idea what they were talking about, but were more than happy to throw in their 2 cents. Some demanded I rehome my wolves, others suggested calling wildlife control, and a few were already discussing the legal loopholes of HOA jurisdiction. Karen wasn't going to stop at internet slander. She was going to escalate. I didn't have to wait long to find out how. By noon, a white truck rolled up the driveway, the logo on the side reading Animal Control Services. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, one of them holding a clipboard while the other adjusted his sunglasses and looked around like he was inspecting a crime scene. I walked out onto the porch, arms crossed as they approached. The lead officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we've received multiple complaints regarding dangerous animals on this property." I already knew exactly who was behind this, but I played along. "Dangerous animals?" I asked. "You mean my wolves?" The second officer, a younger guy who looked fresh out of training, hesitated. Yes, sir. The reports claim that they're aggressive and have been threatening residents." I let out a slow, deliberate laugh. "Threatening? They're not the ones who broke onto private property, set up an illegal campground, and trashed my land." The lead officer shifted uncomfortably. "Be that as it may, if these animals pose a risk to public safety, we have to investigate." I whistled sharply, and within seconds, Odin appeared at the edge of the clearing. He didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth, just stood there watching. The younger officer immediately took a step back, but the lead officer held his ground. "Are they properly contained?" he asked. "They don't need to be," I said. "They don't leave my property unless I say so." The officer scratched his chin, flipping through the papers on his clipboard. "You got documentation for them?" I nodded. "All registered, microchipped, and legal. If you check your database, you'll see I've got permits for every single one." The younger officer fumbled with a tablet, typing something in. A few seconds later, he muttered, "He's right." The lead officer sighed. "All right, we don't have grounds to remove them." Before they could leave, a familiar screech rang through the air. "What do you mean, you can't take them?" Karen stormed toward us, her face flushed with fury. She must have been waiting nearby, ready to bask in her victory, only to realize that it wasn't happening. These wolves are dangerous. They attacked my friends. They nearly killed me, she shrieked. I raised an eyebrow. Oh really? Funny how no one has any injuries. No bite marks. No scratches. Just a bunch of trespassers who ran screaming because they saw glowing eyes in the dark. Karen whirled on the officers. He's lying. You have to do something. The lead officer, to his credit, looked like he had absolutely no patience for whatever this was turning into. Ma'am, he has the proper documentation, and there is no evidence of these animals being a danger. Unless you have proof of an actual attack, there's nothing we can do. Karen's face twisted into something ugly, her brain scrambling for another angle. Then she snapped her fingers like she had just solved a great mystery. What about zoning laws? I know there are restrictions on keeping exotic animals in residential areas. The officer gave her a bored look. This isn't a residential area. It's private property. I grinned. Told you. Karen was now full-on sputtering, unable to process the reality that she wasn't getting her way. I could practically see the gears in her head turning, trying to find another way to spin this into a victory. But before she could open her mouth, I decided to end the conversation. If you step onto my land again, Karen, I said, my voice calm but firm, I will file trespassing charges. If you try anything else, I will take legal action against you and your HOA. And just so you know, I've already got a lawyer looking into the damage your campers did to my property. So if I were you, I'd start preparing for that bill. The officers barely tried to hide their smirks. Karen's face turned from red to pale in an instant. You can't, she stammered. I can, I said. And I will. With that, I turned and walked back toward my house, leaving her standing there, fists clenched, teeth grinding so hard I thought they might shatter. The officers followed, getting back into their truck without another word. As I stepped onto my porch, I glanced back just in time to see Karen storm off, her phone already pressed to her ear. She was calling someone. Maybe her cousin Bob, the lawyer. Maybe someone else. It didn't matter. She wasn't done. And neither was I. The days following Karen's meltdown were quiet. Almost too quiet. If there was one thing I knew about people like her, it was that they didn't just accept defeat. They festered, plotting their next move, unable to comprehend that the world didn't bend to their will. I expected retaliation, but I didn't expect her to be so desperate so quickly. That should have been my first clue that she was about to do something monumentally stupid. It started with a construction crew showing up at the edge of my property, complete with bulldozers and survey equipment. I watched from my porch as they parked, setting up like they had every right to be there. I didn't recognize any of them, but they had the unmistakable energy of people who had been paid well to ask no questions. I walked up to them, hands in my pockets, as one of the workers, a guy with a clipboard and a bright orange vest, looked me up and down. You the owner? He asked. I nodded. Yep. Mind telling me why you're here? He glanced at the papers in his hands, then back at me. We've been contracted to start groundwork for a community recreational space, supposed to be a shared lot for HOA members. I let that sit for a moment, then exhaled through my nose. You realize this is private property, right? His brow furrowed. We were told this land is being converted under HOA jurisdiction. I barely resisted the urge to laugh. Who told you that? Karen. He hesitated, looking at his notes. Karen something. HOA president. I rubbed my temples. All right, let's make this real simple. You and your crew need to pack up and leave. Right now. The guy shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing he'd been roped into something shady. Look, we're just following work orders. If there's an issue, you need to take it up with the HOA. There is no issue, I said. There is no HOA jurisdiction here. This is my land. If you start digging, you'll be trespassing, and I will have you arrested. So unless you want a lawsuit, I suggest you turn those trucks around. The workers exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring among themselves. Finally, the lead guy sighed and pulled out his phone. I need to make a call. A few minutes later, I heard the unmistakable screech of Karen's SUV flying up the road. She parked so aggressively that the tires kicked up a cloud of dust, and she practically threw herself out of the driver's seat. What do you think you're doing? She barked, stomping toward me like an angry toddler. Stopping illegal construction, I said. You really thought this would work? She squared her shoulders, her face twisting into a smug smile. Actually, yes. Because I filed paperwork to claim this land under community expansion. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. You filed paperwork, I repeated. For land you don't own. Yes, she said, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. And once it's officially processed, this land will be open to the HOA. I let out a slow breath. Karen, you can't just claim land because you want it. Oh, but I can, she said, pulling out a stack of documents. You see, under local property ordinances, any unincorporated land that isn't actively maintained can be reallocated for community purposes. And since you've been using this space for, she made air quotes, wild animal breeding instead of actual residential use, the HOA board voted to claim it. I stared at her in stunned silence. She was so confident, so sure that she had finally won. But she hadn't done her homework. I smiled. All right, let's see it. Karen hesitated. See what? The approval, I said. You said it was filed, right? Where's the official approval? Her smugness flickered. It's being processed. I tilted my head. So it's not approved. It will be. It won't, I corrected. Because I spoke to my lawyer yesterday, and he's already filed a cease and desist order against any unauthorized claims on my property. Not only that, but I also have an active restraining order against unauthorized entry onto my land. Which, by the way, includes you. Karen's face turned red. That's ridiculous. You can't just block a community initiative. I can and I did, I said. And since you decided to bring a construction crew onto private property, you've now escalated this into criminal trespassing and attempted illegal seizure of land. The workers were already packing up. They weren't stupid. They saw the writing on the wall. Karen, however, was too deep in her own delusions to back down. I will sue you, she snapped. I will take this all the way to the highest court if I have to. Go ahead, I said. But while you're at it, you might want to figure out how you're going to pay for all the damage your little camping stunt caused. Karen blinked. What? Oh, did you think I forgot? I said. The destroyed solar panels? The ruined garden? The fence they tried to tear down? I've got estimates from contractors, and the total damages add up to about $50,000. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That's not my responsibility. It is, I said, because you organized the event. You encouraged the trespassing, which means you're financially liable. She took a step back, shaking her head. No, this isn't happening. It is, I said. And since you love legal loopholes so much, here's another one for you. If you can't pay, I can take legal action to seize your assets, including your house. The color drained from her face. It was poetic, really. Karen had tried to steal my land, and in the process, she had put herself in the exact position she had hoped to put me in. She had pushed so hard, so blindly, without ever considering that she was the one playing with fire. I watched the realization settle in. The way her entire world crumbled in real time. The construction crew was gone. The HOA, already hit with fines from my initial legal action, wouldn't back her up. She was alone. Without another word, she turned and stormed back to her SUV, slamming the door so hard the whole vehicle rocked. She tore out of the driveway, her tires skidding as she fled. That was the last time I ever saw her. A few weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that Karen had sold her house and moved out of state. Apparently, she had racked up so much debt from failed lawsuits and legal fines that she had no choice but to cut her losses. As for the HOA, they never bothered me again. The legal fees I hit them with put them in such a hole that their power diminished significantly. Without Karen leading the charge, they were just another dysfunctional neighborhood group with no real influence. The land remained mine. The wolves remained free. And peace finally returned to my home.